Hello, and welcome to our webinar on product development success, how to efficiently and quickly move from concept to market. I'm Carolyn Lowell with Bone Zone, and presenting and sponsoring today's webinar is Lincotech Medical. Our speaker is Neil Etherington, Lincotech's Director of Product Development. Neil is responsible for new product development and client support in the US. He has 17 years of experience in the product development industry, and he and his team are focused on serving the medical device market for large OEMs, small entrepreneurial startups, and really everyone in between. In today's webinar, Neil will explore the ways in which leveraging a vertically integrated supplier for product development can make a smoother design transfer process, but as well as ways to speed up the product development process. These are critical pain points that I hear from device companies all the time. And Neil's goal today is to share how he and his team at Lincotech tackle those challenges for customers. To say a few additional words about Lincotech, the company is a global manufacturer providing full service medical device development and manufacturing across orthopedic markets. With a focus on innovation and speed to market, Lincotech Medical guides OEM customers through every step of the process from ideation to high volume production. So thank you to Lincotech for sponsoring and speaking during today's webinar. I have just two quick notes before Neil starts presenting. One, we will conduct a short Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have questions, you can submit them in the Q&A box on your screen. And two, we are recording today's webinar. If you would like to refer to it later or send it to a colleague, you will be able to access it on the Bone Zone website no later than Tuesday the 14th. With that, Neil, I would like to hand it over to you to start your presentation.
Thank you, Carolyn. All right, well, thank you everybody for your attendance. Again, the point of this is to kind of share our experience with how we have had success and in some cases failures in the product development process and transferring that all the way out to product on the shelf. And I'm going to try to make this relatively quick. You'll find out that nothing that I'm going to present today is going to be new information to a lot of people here. It's simply how we have done it and how we are trying to improve that process. But part of the first part of the presentation is kind of talking about why we as Lincotech why we think we are capable of this, and then what other people can learn from what we do, and how that applies to what matters to large OEMs and entrepreneurs alike. And we'll try to focus on the learning objectives. And again, as Carolyn indicated, if there's any questions, please go ahead and submit them through the Q&A tab, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Okay, so by way of agenda, and this is kind of the main objectives, is a quick Lincotech Medical overview, as well as talking about the integrated supply chain that Carolyn mentioned, and then really the speed to market, as well as how we try to save time and money for ourselves and for our partners and clients during the product development process. So again, really briefly, product development has been around for thousands of years. There's the job is relatively simple. You find an unmet need in some niche or some market, and you start with a set of questions or items that need to be addressed. In the design development world, we call those design inputs. And then the creation of, through the process is your output. That's not new or novel to anybody, and we're not going to really focus on that part of the development cycle. But I do think it's important to highlight it up front And we'll talk about that more a little bit later in the presentation. But one of the key things is how at that point, you have your design output, you have the result of an effort. How do you ensure that it meets all of the stated needs? How do you know that product is safe? How do you know that product can be made repeatedly and accurately? How do you know that product will endure a stated longevity? And really the design process itself to some extent is the easy part. We all suffer the dreaded design transfer, where we take this product and move it from a one-off functional device and scale it up for mass production and introduction to the market. And that's really where we have noted delays and problems in the process. And again, we're not going to focus solely on design transfer today, but that's a key part of the process that we want to talk about, and really focusing on how we can speed it up, how we as a company have integrated many of these processes and many of these functions under one hypothetical roof, under the banner of a single company, in order to speed it up and integrate. So very briefly about our company, we're a strong group. We have unique processes. We have a global footprint, and we don't claim to be able to service every aspect of a project. We do have key strategic partners, as do you all, but we've focused on getting as many of these processes in-house as is reasonably possible. And the history of the company, again, I'm going to go through this very briefly, but we want to find specialists in aspects of the supply chain and bring those in-house. And that allows for parallel movement through the process that we'll talk a lot about today. But Lincotech started in 1973 in Italy as a general engineering firm. And from there, through aggressive acquisitions, and again, it's most recently in the last decade where there's been this really aggressive growth through different acquisitions. We find ourselves in late 2021 where we are now, with this group that we have, that we can service our clients and our strategic partners through this larger company that's integrated. So we do have a large breadth of experience in orthopedics, anywhere from spine, trauma, recon, extremities, and we've dabbled outside of orthopedics as well, in soft bracing, OBGYN, and a few other kind of niche markets. We've seen a lot of different products. We've touched a lot of different processes along the way, and so we feel like we have a good experience that we can share with potential customers, but not only that, just with the market in general, to kind of help speed things up and improve the speed at which products get to market. So the idea of an integrated supply chain is not, again, I feel like a little bit like a broken record. I'm preaching to the choir to some extent. I'm not teaching anything new here. The integrated supply chain is something that is not news to anybody, and it really truly can speed up the process. But that doesn't mean it will. You still have to execute properly. You still have to communicate between your divisions properly. But when they're under the same management, it allows for strategic planning and early planning throughout the supply chain to allow that to speed up. And some processes we don't have in-house, and we do have to go outside for some of these strategic partnerships, but that's all part of the supply chain. That's all part of the parallel pathing that we'll talk about here in just a minute. So, this is a pretty simple slide, but basically we start from product development all the way through sterile packaging and then product on the shelf that the clinicians can use. But we do want to focus during our process on those areas that can really slow down the development cycle. When we talk about streamlining validation processes, these, especially when we're talking about unique manufacturing processes, for example, additive manufacturing, coding, that kind of thing, those things can take a lot of time to validate those processes. V&V builds can take a lot of time if the manufacturing entity is not up to speed with what the product is, if they've not had the opportunity to provide DFM up front. And again, the ultimate goal of this is to reduce the total cost of the supply chain. And whether that's through dollars, through simply time, by speeding up the process, it's kind of the same thing. And that's really what we focus on, and what others can focus on is integrating those supply chains all the way from design through production. As a company, we've focused on our kind of expanding our global footprint and through those acquisitions we talked about earlier, but we have many different sites in the US, across Italy, that's centralized to Europe, and a coating facility in China to help out with supply chain issues and cost. And we feel like we've targeted specific technology centers geographically to be able to help our customers around the world. So there's some unique opportunities within Linkotech that we kind of like to boast about, but we have casting, we have additive manufacturing, machining, and coating. But the key here is that we have these in-house, and we can discuss these early on in the project. We can explore unique manufacturing during early phase development. Before we've even truly started developing a concept, we can start talking to our casting facility. Is this going to be a high volume product that can be cast? Is it maybe a slightly lower volume product, or something where additive manufacturing is going to be key to an ingrowth perspective? And so having those discussions early on early in the phase of design can save a lot of time and therefore a lot of money on the back end. And I'm not going to focus individually too much on these, but from casting perspective, we do have a dedicated casting facility in the US that has integrated machining capabilities to clean up those castings as necessary. And sorry, let me go back here. But the key here is this, we have validated equipment and processes within the casting facility. And that really can help speed up the process. It can help our clients be more successful with this. And the same goes with additive manufacturing. We do have 26 printers available worldwide. But the thing we want to highlight is this validated equipment and processes. Specific to additive, we have clean lines that are validated. We can leverage our experience with cleaning these parts to help out, to ensure success with any product that comes through. Now there may be some little things here and there that we need to tweak, but we have a vast experience with cleaning these additively produced products, and that's key. With the precision machining, I'm not going to go into this one at all, other than we have machines that are validated and processes that are validated, and that's key. And we allow people to use those, to leverage those validations. And the same thing with coating. We have all sorts of different coatings that we can apply to to your product. And again, we have validated equipment and processes. Kind of beating a dead horse there, but it's one of the things that we have found to be critical is those validations provide value to the process and to the partners. So the end-to-end service offering, you know, it's creative and sound engineering. We have decades of experience in that field, and we really pay attention to the voice of the customer in this. And as we go into the next slide, which is kind of the speed to market, we'll focus on this a little bit more. As we talk about prototyping, we have, you know, a few different options for rapid prototyping. Plastic, very early on to look at ergonomics, to look at basic functionality. We pride ourselves on a quick turn metal prototype shop. So a machining center that is co-located with the design facility, that a standard lead time is 2 weeks or less. And that's very critical, where we're not waiting 6 or 8 weeks to get prototypes and to break them. Because one of the key things we've found is, and one thing everybody can learn is, especially early on in the design, you want to fail often and fail quickly. I guess not often necessarily, the less the better, I suppose, but you do want to fail quickly. You want to make something, you want to break it, you want to understand the weaknesses that are inherent to your specific design, and be able to make quick changes and get it back on the machines to build and fail again, or to understand that you are where you need to be relative to your design inputs, and you can move on through the process. But we have the capability, and I would urge those listening to find this quick turn prototyping capability to be able to do that, to fail quickly. One thing that's been key for our success is we also have in-house a cadaver lab, where we've been able to take parts directly from the prototype shop while they're still metaphorically warm, as it were, put them in the surgeon's hands, and then have a cadaver lab experience. And then if something breaks or something doesn't work, we adjourn, take the surgeon to dinner, whatever we need to do. And a few hours later, we can have a design tweak that's machined and ready to go and get back into the lab, literally saving weeks, 4, 5, 6 weeks in that design cycle by scheduling the surgeon's time again and getting through another build cycle. So that's been really critical, is being able to fail quickly and adapt quickly. The other thing we have is testing and regulatory in-house. We have a strategic working relationship with some of the larger test facilities in the nation, and we do not do extensive verification testing in-house. But what we do is we have a couple of MTS machines where we can do extensive qualification testing. We work with the test facilities to create fixtures that they are familiar with, that they will use as we transfer the testing to verification. And that way we're minimizing the differences. We're minimizing any effect that different operators or different fixtures could have. And we do try to leverage those partnerships. And again, that's something that anybody can do. Reach out to those test facilities early to understand what the requirements are and to understand what the fixturing may be, and mirror that during your qualification testing. And as we move on to scale manufacturing, the thing here is experience matters. Knowing how and when to do certain activities is critical. And the earlier in the process that you can get this done, the better. And we pride ourselves on our integrated supply chain, being able to get in with whatever manufacturer is going to be doing this early on, so we can really minimize the lag and the downtime there. And if you don't have experience with this, it's very easy for things to slip through the cracks. Understanding the duration of the IQ, OQ, PQ runs, understanding, and this is one example I'll give of an integration we do not have is packaging. in general is a very painful experience for many projects because we don't get in early enough to talk about packaging and the ramifications that that will have. So all of that is meant to talk about kind of the speed to market. And this is the goal, saving time and money. And a dear mentor of mine once told me, and it was one of kind of his many mottos, but the easiest way to move fast is to not go backwards. And that's maybe a little bit hard to understand if you're not familiar with it, but it makes a lot of sense because going backwards is the costs time and money, and it's something that can be avoided in most cases with some forethought. So as we talk about product development as it relates to speed to market, we have you need to find a large depth and breadth of experience. And what this does is this allows for crossover solutions. We often are able to think about a solution in sports med, for example, that transfers over to recon on an instrument or something like that. There's crossover solutions that are available to those that have the depth and specifically the breadth of experience designing things. Prototyping, again, fail fast. Prototype quickly, fail fast. Testing and regulatory, we talked about, but have a relationship with testing engineers. If you don't have them in-house, go find a facility that you can build a relationship with, along with good regulatory experience to help understand the process. So this is something that Linkotech uses. This is our 5-phase system for product development. Everybody has something similar to this, although the nomenclature and the numbering might be slightly different, but everyone has something that's fairly similar. The thing that I want to highlight here, and it goes along with not going backwards, but it's really taking the time up front in phase 1, in the feasibility. Some people call it the concept phase, to really truly understand what you're building. Then it's having the ability to slow down up front to be able to move more quickly down the road. And I like to relate everything to my 5th grade basketball team that I coach. I'm constantly telling those guys, those boys, that they need to slow down. And it's confusing to them because they just want to grab the ball and rush, and that's not, it's counterintuitive, but that's not the best way to go. They really need to slow down, be able to see the vision of the whole process, and act quickly at the appropriate time. But if we're always just head down and running as fast as we can, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to end up going backwards. And so during phase 1, we need to focus on the design inputs, making sure that what we are going to build is what we truly need, making sure that our regulatory strategy is in place, that the intellectual property has been discussed and understood to the extent it can. And to be frank, new entrepreneurs in this space really struggle with this concept of slowing down. They're paying a lot of money up front and they don't see the benefit to this. And so this is one where we as a group try to educate our partners and clients on the importance of slowing down and really truly understanding what your product needs to be. The next one, as we move into phase 2, it's the innovation phase for us, where we actually design the product. And the big one here is make sure that we do a sufficient amount of qualification testing. This is one where you need to be able to define your worst case. You need to make and break things, and it's very difficult because it can cost a lot of money to build prototypes, to test them, to truly understand what the failure points of your design are. Now, the learning point here is you would much rather learn this in phase 2 during qualification testing than to learn it during phase 3, which is your verification testing. Verification testing historically is, every time I do it, it's very scary because you're never quite sure what's going to happen. But if we use this appropriately as confirmation of what we already know, you will minimize your surprises. You don't want to come into phase 3 or you don't want to come into verification testing not knowing where your implant is going to break. You know, we have a current example in-house that is a bad example of doing this. It's an example of doing this improperly, where we did not properly do our qualification testing. To be frank, we cheaped out a little bit, right? There was conversations where we decided to move forward at risk, which is an option. But now we're going backwards during phase 3, going back into phase 2, opening up the design, redesigning, finding another point where we can hit design freeze to then restart verification testing. And it's months of time and tens of thousands of dollars to get back to this point, where if we would have spent a couple more weeks or, you know, a few $1,000s up front to break more parts, we would have had a better understanding moving into verification testing and would have minimized the surprises there. And you'll notice we go in line from phase 3 to phase 5. That's kind of on purpose. Phase 5 is the validation with the surgeon. And again, this is one where it's critical during phase 2 to have cadaver labs, to have surgeon experiences with the device. So after design freeze, you're not getting to validation and having something go wrong where we're trying to validate the user needs, because that can be devastating to a project. Because if you fail the validation, you're going back to phase 2, you're redesigning. You may be doing something in that redesign that puts in jeopardy the validity of your verification testing that you've already completed. So again, you want to make sure that this validation is simply a confirmation of what you already know versus kind of a guessing game with, you know, crossing your fingers going into that experience. And the big one here is phase 4. Phase 4 for us is design transfer. It's transfer to manufacturing. And you'll see here, we have it overlapping phase 1. We get in as early as we possibly can with manufacturers to start this process, to start planning the IQ, OQ, PQs, to get DFM right up front that guides our design, rather than having manufacturing have to accept something that's already been frozen and try to work it into their system. It's a much more efficient process and can work very well. So this I'm not going to go into with great depth, but basically it's, if you do purely linear through the phases, it can take, you know, 2 years, 2.5 years is a fairly common design cycle. If you kind of do a pseudo concurrent process, it does save quite a bit of time. And the rapid concurrent development that we use is even more of a time savings. Now, don't look at these numbers specifically. It all depends on the scope of the project and how complicated it is. But the bottom line is we can save roughly 50% of time versus a purely linear development cycle. And we do that by focusing on avoiding risk up front by taking a little bit more time. Another part of this is our QMS cycle. We have a very robust QMS cycle, which again, anybody can do. Make sure you're audit proof, so to speak. Through ISO, FDA, customer audits, we've passed many audits, and we're excited to say that our QMS is fairly robust, but also flexible, and this is key. It allows for risk-based decisions. Now, I want to qualify that statement a little bit to say that this is business risk, where we are focusing on, maybe we do a pilot build concurrently with a V&V test build. That's clearly a business risk, because if something goes haywire during verification testing, you may have lost all that money and all those parts that you took during the pilot launch. but we allow for that. We have that capability for that business risk, but we don't allow for patient risk. And so that's one clarification that's critical here, is that the business risk is acceptable as long as the client and the partner buy off on the fact that these are being built or done at risk. That business risk is acceptable, and we are flexible enough to allow for that, as long as we're not putting the patients at risk. And then again, we're flexible enough to be geared toward parallel progression through the project phases. And from a regulatory expertise, again, we have a depth and breadth in virtually all orthopedic fields. We're very familiar with the 510(k) process, somewhat familiar with IDE, but kind of our main expertise is in the 510(k) process with Class 2 devices. But the bottom line here, again, is find the experience that you need for your specific product. That's key, and get them in early in the project and during those early conceptual phases. And truly understanding how the FDA works, I would highly recommend using the Q-Sub process, even for a Me Too device. We've started using the Q-Sub process, and for those of you that may not be familiar with this, we can talk about it. I'm happy to answer questions after the meeting or look this up online. But the Q-Sub process allows you to get in with the FDA early on to ask some key questions about your regulatory and your testing strategy. And really, we've been able to leverage getting in the door with the reviewer who will very likely review your 510(k). So you're starting that relationship early, and they're becoming familiar with your product and your goals early on. So I'd highly recommend using this Q-Sub process to speed up your regulatory work down the road. And then, and like I say here, just really leveraging the Q-Sub process and the 510(k) process to your benefit, and understanding where that can be done is critical. And that's where getting a good regulatory expert up front will help. And again, we've talked about this a little bit, but having the relationship with the test facilities they all work very closely with the FDA. They work very closely with ASTM to define the standards, to understand what the requirements are going to be for testing. So find that facility, and you will find anymore that a lot of these test facilities have onboard regulatory experts to help you through the process. So again, get them involved early on in the process. That's something we do with every project, and it's been very helpful. So I mean, that's the gist of it. But to summarize, to get an efficient product launch, an integrated supply chain can be very helpful. It's having all those processes, all those capabilities in-house to be able to leverage that, to have the discussions up front. That can lead to greater speed, which is time and cost savings, and ultimately potential for an increased market share. Whether it's a Me Too device or a novel device, getting to market quicker is better for everybody, including the patients. So it's something that we need to put our focus into. But if there's one key takeaway from this, I want people to understand that really, truly, the best way to go fast is not to go backwards. And that means being methodical up front, slowing down a little bit, and getting the inputs you need from your KOLs, from marketing, from surgeons, anybody that's going to be a key indicator of the product, a user of the product. Make sure that you know what they need up front. And sometimes that takes a little bit of digging by the engineering team, by the marketing team, to truly figure out what their needs are going to be. But just to close, don't go backwards. Go slow up front. And when the time is right, speed up and go quickly. But most of all, don't go backwards. And find somebody, if it's not in-house, that can focus on the product, focus on the customer, and focus on the patient to get your product to market. And so that's the presentation. There's some contact information here on this last slide for myself and for the my boss, the managing director of operations here in the U.S., Francesco Bucciati. And with that, I thank everybody for their time, and I guess I'll turn that back over to you, Carolyn, for some questions.
Great. Neil, thank you so much for your insight and an excellent presentation on the product development process. You mentioned multiple times, don't go backwards. I really like that phrase. Can you share where companies often fumble in the product development process and ultimately go backwards?
Yeah, absolutely. And you say companies, but it's the way we learn is through experience, right? So I've seen all these personally in my years in product development, and I'm sure I'm not alone, but the biggest one, and I kind of talked about this, but it's really truly understanding the scope of your project, understanding what the user needs are, understanding what the design inputs are. And everybody has their own nomenclature for this, but there needs to be an input-output matrix, a guiding document that has the project defined that people refer to often throughout the project. And if something changes, that document needs to be updated. So that's one where people really end up going backwards, is not understanding or even just forgetting about what truly the design inputs are as the design evolves. And another big one that we mentioned is the qualification testing, not understanding how your project is going to break, right? And then going into verification, not understanding that having failures during verification after you've spent $50, $60, $100,000 on parts, and having to go backwards and do a redesign cycle and rebuild all of that to start over. Same thing for validation, like I mentioned. One thing I probably didn't spend enough time on is just the manufacturing process validations. Having an idea up front of what needs to happen there, getting in with the manufacturers early so those validations can be conducted as early as possible in the process. And one thing I was going to mention is, and I see from Roy Morgan, he's one of our key partners. Thank you, Roy, for attending, by the way. But he has a question that fits in really well with this. It's packaging and packaging support. And he's going to be biased in this because he works for a packaging vendor. But I appreciate the question, because this is one area where we don't have this capability in-house. And so we work with vendors like Roy to support us. And the larger OEMs are probably more familiar with this. They have packaging engineers in-house. Where this can be a real problem is for startup companies that don't understand the packaging process. So if you are a startup company, I would contact a packaging vendor, a fully capable packaging vendor. And that's a big distinction, because let them handle the packaging, because that's what they do. That's their expertise. Contact them early, as soon as you have a rough idea of what your product is going to be. Is it going to be a triangle or a circle or a square? That's the amount of knowledge you need to go to these packaging vendors and start that conversation. Because otherwise it's going to be, as Roy knows and as everybody knows, it's going to be months and months of delay and extra expense for your customer. Sorry, Carolyn, that was kind of a long answer.
No, it's great. Another question is, in-house, does Lincotech focus on osseo integration testing of implants as well as mechanical testing? So
the answer to that is basically no. We do have some studies with our coding group to validate the coding. So I guess it's not a hard no. We do have some testing, and we validate the codings that we do in our Memphis facility. But a lot of that is, it's coupon based with our coatings, and then it ends up being implant specific and geometry specific. So we can help with that process, certainly with the osseo integration. And then again, the mechanical testing, we can do all of that in-house for qualification, but we do not have the volume capacity. And frankly, it's better to go to a third party anyway for verification, mechanical testing. Get an unbiased group to do that testing that's submitted to the FDA.
You had mentioned obviously the different phases of product development and the first phase being, feasibility. Is that the best time for companies to come talk to you?
Um, so typically that does happen, but people come to us during even before that, during a phase 0 type of activity. That's when the people are gathering money to putting their budgets together, and we're quoting the project. They'll have a basic idea of what the product needs to be, of kind of what the high level user needs are. So I would say somewhere between kind of a phase 0 and what I've defined as a phase 1 is a good time to come to us. But even if a client is halfway through their own phase 1, we always, and this can be a little painful for the new clients that don't understand the process. We always do start from scratch at phase 1 and say, okay, here's our user needs, here are our design inputs. You already have the IP freedom to operate in place, or the landscape search, so that's great. We don't have to redo that. So we take what they bring to us. But yes, I think the earlier the better. Phase 0, phase 1, that's pretty typical for when we would start a project.
Great. And I know you've seen it all, and you said that you work with large companies and everything down to startups and surgeons. What is Linkotech's sweet spot as far as the size of company you're working with on these types of projects?
So right now we're probably about 50-50 with what I would call larger OEMs and smaller startup groups. I don't know that we have a sweet spot. The one thing is, if we are able to run a project in our own quality system and then integrate it on the back end through a gap analysis or through rationales into the customer's quality system, that is much more efficient. And we do that kind of in a creative manner sometimes, where we will do that gap analysis and that quality system integration during a 10 or 12 week V&V build. While we're kind of waiting for parts to come off for testing, we can start that effort when there's some quote unquote downtime. But that's a key, is just being able to use, and I say that because sometimes with the larger OEMs that's a little trickier. They have stricter quality systems that they're beholden to. Sure. And so, and then with the smaller startup companies, they may not even have a quality system in place, right? So really, truly, our sweet spot in terms of speed, it all depends on the client and the specific project in terms of what they can adopt from our system versus what we have to do in their system.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. I think we are going to leave it there. Are there any final comments you would like to share?
No, like I said, nothing of what I've presented is novel or or truly groundbreaking. It's there's many other options. You don't have to come to Linkotech, obviously, but it's one of those things where you can think about this stuff beforehand and put these systems in place. And if you don't have the integrated supply chain, you can get out there and beat down some doors and find the strategic partners that you would need in order to make this happen. And then you just have to be that bulldog that stays on it and really watches your timeline and executes.
Great. Well, Neil, really appreciate your time and your presentation and sharing insight today. Thank you to Linkotech again for sponsoring this webinar, and thank you to everybody who attended. I hope you found some valuable information about working with outside partners for your product development process. You can find more information about Linkotech at linkotechmedical.com. And again, this presentation will be available on demand. You can find it on the Bone Zone website no later than next Tuesday. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.